Welcome to Demono's Pod with Tino and Matt. What's up, Matt? And what's up with that Yankees hat?
It's going well, and we have no Yankees today, so I thought I should wear
Don't ever wear that again.
it.
As a Mariners fan, I can't stand the Yankees. So today we are covering our top 10 third base dynasty prospects. Third base is fun. There's some really interesting players here. I think we're ramping up towards the kind of the meat of the minor leaguers. Anxious to get started. Some players on this list that are certainly going to be in the majors this year, a couple of which I think will have starting jobs. What is your first impression of this third base group? And why don't you get started after that with your number one?
Yeah, I think it's really deep. Um, I think there's a good future in MLB with third baseman. I think there's maybe a couple that could break eventually the top five,
Mm-hmm.
depending on what happens with older players. The others there's a lot that I think could be in the top 10. There's some really solid floor players here. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so it's a really deep position. You don't know, I don't know who's going to transition over there too, because everybody's,
Yeah,
listed as shortstop and some of them move over or not. I didn't include Colson Montgomery in this list. A, because I think he gets a lot of hype, and B, because we still don't know where he's going to be.
right,
So there's players like that I think could that break the top 10 that we don't know where they're going to be yet.
right.
So that may even add to it. But the ones that I've included, besides Michael Bush, are pretty much going to be there.
Yeah.
The other thing too, like the pattern I've noticed, there's an international player, there's a high school player in here, and it goes back to the theme last week. There's prospect fatigue that happens to these guys, and they're pushed back. So Collier, House, and then international player who's been pushed back often is Marte. So there's those elements as well. So number one, I have what pretty much is the consensus one, which is Junior Caminero.
Mm-hmm.
Caminero is 20 years old, signed out of the Dominican quite cheaply by Cleveland, and then traded for by Tampa. Teams, I wonder if do teams where they get a phone call about a young player by Tampa, do they just hang up on Tampa now?
I would.
Um,
I would. I would
yeah.
hang up and then I would ask my scouts. I need to know more information about this player.
Yeah.
You know?
So Caminero has a cool combination of hit and power. The power is definitely graded higher. He's BA has him at 80 power. I have him between 70 and 80. A lot of that's based on EV. His EVs are elite. If you took his 90 percentile EV and compared it to players in the MLB, he'd be number 5 already on the list. So 20-year-old again with the international signing, so he is in a college player coming in, but he does have definitely the hype because of what he offers. I think there's stereotyping that takes place. Comps I think are often lazy. So he's compared to Devers often. I think he's a different athlete, different build. He does have most scouts have him at 55 run. He's not going to run a lot, but I think that underscores his athleticism. He was measured at 81% sprint speed on Savant, so not the prototypical, stereotypical slow third baseman with power. So yeah, I think there's things he needs to work on with ground ball rate. I think that isn't a huge concern because he can get into launch when he wants to, and he sprays the ball all over the place really hard. So I don't think that's going to have a huge effect or impact. I like to see his walk rate increase as well. But with somebody that is going to hit it this hard and have an under 20% K rate, I could see that being a skill that could be developed. So that's not a huge concern either. So I think he's clearly the number one. He has a potential to be elite. The other question mark as far as dynasty versus redraft is what is Tampa going to do? And that's a big debate as well. Is he going to start in AAA? A lot of local Tampa papers are saying yes. Others are saying Tampa may want to take advantage of the draft rule and roll the dice on whether they can get a draft pick if he wins Rookie of the Year. So that's still up in the air. I think a lot of it depends too on his performance. He raked it in Winter League. He actually did improve his walk rate there and just hit the crap out of the ball. So a lot of it depends on the spring and what Tampa wants to do and where they see their team. And the other thing to keep an eye on is who Tampa trades. Are they going to trade Ramirez? Are they still going to trade Paredes? And that would open up a spot as well. There were rumors that he was going to move to short temporarily because of Wander, but I think the trade with Seattle kind of nixed that. I don't think it'd be a smart move anyway. Just have him settle at third. He may even move with his arm to the outfield, the corner outfield in the future, because Tampa has another player on here who's third baseman as well that may move into that slot.
I don't think Meade stays at third, if that's who you're talking about.
Oh no, I'm talking about Braden Taylor.
Oh, I agree with all the things you said for the most part. I have him as a 60 hit, 65 power. I don't give 70 power often. And I think that he has like it is a huge swing, right? I'm not comping it to him, but it's maybe because fresh in my mind because I've been watching his highlights recently. It reminds me of Gary Sheffield a little bit. The fact that his wrists are so strong and he swings so hard with coordination. I love him as a player. I think you're right. The smart move is to settle him in at third. I don't know what it means for playing time this year necessarily. I think he's so much more talented than Paredes or Yandy Diaz or Richie Palacios, who they traded for. And I think Basabe is the one infielder that they have on the bench. But I think it's too good to keep out of the lineup. I'd be shocked if, in part because he's going to come in as, him and Evan Carter, probably the two the two candidates to be AL Rookie of the Year right now. It doesn't make sense for them to keep him down, right? In terms of being able to get that draft pick like the Mariners did with Julio. I think he's got, probably 290 to 335 home run potential. And that's, that might be annually. That might not be his ceiling necessarily, but annually, that's something that we're potentially looking at. I don't see a lot of holes in his game. To your point, he puts the ball on the ground a lot. He doesn't walk as much as I would like personally. I think his body is going to continue to fill out. And so I don't see him running much. I also think it's stupid to be honest, for a player of that caliber with the bat to be running at all because you're risking injury. He is my number one as well. I think it's pretty clear that he's head and shoulders above these other players here. I love him. I think it'll be very interesting to see how all of this plays out. There's just a part of me that hesitates with Tampa Bay. And they have plenty of players who get 600 plate appearances, right? It's not as if a Rosarena and Yandy and I forgot who the other one was last season. It's not as if they don't get a bunch of plate appearances, because they do. But maybe it's PTSD, but it definitely worries me, right? They jerk their prospects around in the same way that the Dodgers do to a certain extent. And that's not something that I really want to be messing with if I'm really truly invested in a player. Last season, let's see real quick. Rosarena 654, Yandy 600, Paredes 571, Lowe 501, Wander 491, Brandon Lau 436. So I bet you this year you see something around 500 from him. That'd be my guess. Spoiler alert, I actually have him at number 6 overall at third base. That's including major leaguers. That's how much I think of him. I think he's great and a superstar. I have him slotted right below Manny Machado and right above Nolan Arenado. And I know that's crazy. And I know it's a risk. A player like Arenado, you're going to get, what you're getting from him. But Caminero has that kind of lightning in his bat. He's just a different prospect. Um, and if he stays at third, I think you could make the case that he's number one over Jackson Holiday, potentially. Number two. Do we have the same number
Number
two?
two should be you because I suspect this is your guy
All right,
that you've been
same
touting
guy.
on the pod for a long time.
Yep. So we are in agreement. These are the only two prospects on my third base list that I have listed as low risk. I think they're both going to be starters this season at third base for their respective teams, and it is indeed Noelvi Marte. Anyone who's listened to the podcast, you certainly know I've always loved Marte. As a Mariners prospect, I love Marte. Um, Pretty swing, makes a ton of contact, draws walks, faster than you expect him to be, enormous raw power, enormous raw power. Like when he first came up, it was eye-opening for people in the Seattle organization just how much raw he had. Like talking about like 65, 70 raw. Um, at this point, I think his in-game power is closer to a 60, but I think we're looking at an underrated 55 to 60 hit, 60 power, 55 to 60 run third baseman, right? This is he has a shot at 30 to 35 home runs and 20 steals at third base, which essentially makes him peak Jose Ramirez, right? And
Mhm.
I think people sleep on him. There was a tremendous amount of prospect fatigue. We had been talking about him since he was 17. He's now
Mhm.
22. And this is his second organization. And so people wonder, well, what's wrong with him? He got traded, right? What's wrong with him? He's heavier now. He's listed at 6 feet 216. He's not going back to shortstop or second base. But watch him swing. It's it's a gorgeous swing. I think he's got a shot to play in a corner, kind of like you talked about with Caminero. The other thing is he's playing in frickin' Cincinnati, right? Where the ball flies. So I don't think it will be hard for him to luck into 25 home runs pretty quickly. And that offense is going to be good. I love him. I've tried so many times to trade for him in our home league, offering ludicrous offers, trying to get him. I went to see him in Tri-Cities when he played for Everett. Loved him then, still love him now. I think has the potential to be a top five third baseman in fantasy for a long, long time. Uh, and I think he's vastly undervalued in this moment. I don't think he will be starting after this year. And for ranking sake, I actually have him at 9 overall amongst third basemen, believe it or not. I think he's that good and in that good of a situation in Cincinnati.
Mhm.
Do you have anything to add with Marte?
I think he's definitely the one here that could be, you're always looking for third basemen who kind of stand out and have different skills. So his run is really underrated. How often are they going to run him? But Cincinnati, Spencer Steer freaking almost did he have over 20 stolen bases last year? But
Close. I just
but
was
if they're
looking at him.
confident to run somebody like that, they're going to run Marte, and Marte is 91 percentile measured last year. So I would argue, I think BA has him listed at 55. I would if Caminero is 55 with an
Marte's
81,
60.
yeah, he should be 60. So I love that. So he could put my team above other teams in head to head at third base with those stolen bases. And
Right.
again, Cincinnati itself with the home run is going to up his power grade just as far as park factor goes. Um, what I like about him, he has that pull side power, but at the same time, he could, one of the criticisms is he goes the other way
Mm-hmm.
softly. But I think that's going to be a skill once they try to mess with that, and then you still have the short porch and right field too. You could poke it out there. So yeah, I have Marte up there. I have both Caminero and Marte in the top 10 already too. I have them um, right before somebody like Royce Lewis, who I think is a great floor, solid player, but Lewis doesn't offer the upside that these two players do. So in the sense of dynasty, that's where I would place these two.
Right. I have Caminero 6, Arenado 7, Lewis 8, Marte 9 for this season for redraft. But if we're talking about dynasty ranks, yeah, I have Marte above him for sure. Steer had 15 stolen bases last season. Steer's not very fast. The Reds' home run park factor for right-handed hitters last season only was 121. So it's 21% easier for a right-handed hitter to hit a home run in Cincinnati than major league average. So yeah, when you think about that, it's pretty telling, right? I asked the question, you bring up the speed with Marte and he has 20 steal potential. I asked the question, how much different is, and people are going to laugh at this, but go look at the numbers and talk to me in a couple years and think about the park. How much different will Marte look than Gunnar Henderson? Right? If Gunnar Henderson's peak or Gunnar Henderson's, ceiling is 30 plus home runs and 20 plus RBIs, hitting near the top of a lineup, that's kind of what you're talking about with Marte. And I know people want to jump on that Gunnar bandwagon and be excited about him. And I think I have him at 4 in my overall third base ranks right now for redraft. But the reality is I'm at 3. I don't know. I think Marte's ceiling is in the same place, right? It's the prospect fatigue. It's the right-handed hitter. It's the fact that Marte is pretty thick at this point, right? He's 216 pounds, but he's a hell of an athlete. And excuse me, I love him. I love Marte. He is one of my absolute favorite players in the game, to be honest. Who do you have at 3?
A 3 is somebody we talked about last week, and I got under the hood a little bit more. And I think he's extremely underrated. I think even Pipeline underscored him today as a player that could even be up for Roy in the NL if he plays a lot, and that is Michael Busch. Bush is solid all around. The only thing you could nix him on is speed. But he's the prototypical third baseman, quarter infielder. If he plays first base, that's fine. But if we're talking about position eligibility, I think he is definitely third base this year for eligibility, and he may continue to sneak in some 10 starts at or plays at third base. His EVs are strong across the board. Great eye. His swinging strike is low, good contact. Low, I mean, comparatively to other power hitters at this position. Can hit to all fields, which I really like as well. That plays well with the Cubs specifically. You get the ball in the air on the right day in Chicago, you get hit it anywhere, and you're gonna benefit. So yeah, I just think he's if Marte and Caminero are kind of the high ceiling players on this list, Bush is a very, very high floor for me, especially if he gets over 500 bats in with the Cubs. I think it was a brilliant trade by the Cubs. They gave some pretty solid young prospects for Bush, but I think they have good plans for him, and they have a great system. They identify players well, and now they have a great manager as well. So, who I think could put Bush in the right positions to succeed there.
I love Michael Busch too. I don't have him on for second or third base, mostly because I don't really know where he's going to end up. If I had to predict from where he ends up dynasty wise, I think he ends up a first base DH. Because he isn't very mobile. I was just looking, if I was to slot him in at first, I'd probably put him probably below Isaac, but above Manzardo for me, which would slot him in at 4. I would even consider him above Isaac or Mayo, just because I think he's more likely to be good than those guys. There's more questions about those guys. If he does play second, which I don't expect to happen, I'd probably slot him in at 3 above Amador and below Young. And then on this third base list, if I was to slot him, is probably at 4 below my number 3. But I agree with all that. I think he's a 260, 360, potentially 500 slug type of guy, right? He has 25 to 30 home runs in his bat. He takes walks. There is a good amount of swing and miss. We all know him as a prospect with LA. The other cool thing about Bush is he's going to play right now and he's at his physical peak. So
Mm.
if you have him, it is a very cheap way to have a lot of production right now, right? On someone who's being slept on. I
Yeah.
like Bush. I like Bush a lot. As I said, if he's ranked in my top 4 across the board in those positions, that says a lot. Uh,
Mhm.
and the
I would like
opportunity.
to have a bug in the Dodgers telephone
Yeah,
with their GM to see if teams were calling more about Bush or Vargas, because it's obvious both are available or were available and Vargas is still available.
right.
Um, yeah, so I'm just curious about that since Vargas appeared on our lists in the past. It's interesting that I think my suspicion is that the Cubs had their choice because
Right.
Dodgers were desperate to narrow down their 40 man roster, and they had their choice, especially with what the Cubs were offering with those really young guys.
Right.
So yeah, so Bush really has jumped for me up the list this year.
And I think they needed a left-handed bat too to balance out all the righties. Um,
Mhm.
Currently, right now, roster resource has Talkman, Ian Happ as a switch hitter, and then Bush as the only guys hitting from the left side against right-handed pitching. And Bush is currently slated as a starting first baseman hitting 7th against right-handers.
Oh
Um,
wow,
so we'll
it
see how,
shows what the Cubs think about Mervis too. Poor guy.
for sure. And I think Mervis isn't bad. I think Bush is a much better prospect.
Mhm.
Uh, at 3, I have Colt Emerson. Colt Emerson to me is a third baseman through and through. He's going to get bigger, thicker as the years wear on, and I think that's where he ends up. He has the arm to play third, and if you believe that the Mariners will keep the players that they have, Emerson, it has a much different body type than say a Cole Young. Cole Young, I think, ends up at second. We talked about that a lot. Uh, for those who haven't followed Emerson a ton, um, he was drafted by the Mariners. He was the first of 3 first-round picks of the Mariners last year out of Ohio. Came in as a kind of hit overpower, good athlete, similar to Cole Young. I think in a lot of ways, higher floor, maybe lower ceiling is what they saw, but he was only 17 when he got drafted. And he came in and lit it up and made it all the way to Modesto, high A. Um, he is, excuse me, Modesto, which is low A for the Mariners. Uh, in 91 at bats, 374, 496, 1.045 OPS. Not that you can take a ton from just that, but I think what's interesting is his bat is even better than people expected. His ability to impact the ball is different than Cole Young, right? You see Emerson and you can see 25 home runs, right? You can see like there's thunder in the bat. It's different. Uh
Mhm.
he also has, enough speed to not hurt you. I think he has enough speed to be like in that 10, 12, 14 steal range. And so if you have people have comped him a little bit to like a Corey Seager and some of those, or I mean, Kyle Seager and those types of guys, I think he's a better pure hitter than Seager is. And I think
Mhm.
Seager sold out to launch quite a bit towards the end of his career. But I think the sky's the limit for Emerson. He's 18 years old, just turned 18 basically, and is already hitting in A ball, right? Uh,
Mhm.
the upside to me with him is higher than most of the other guys on this list. And what I like about him too is he has a balanced profile. And so if he does indeed become like the 280, 290, 25 home run, low 800s OPS, 10 to 12 steal type of player, that player for me slots in as a slightly above average third baseman, right? You're talking
Mhm.
about what people are wish casting for Royce Lewis this year, right? You're talking about a, I don't know, like a Jose Ramirez light type of player. I love Emerson. He's my number 3. I do get to see these guys more because I cover and follow the Mariners, but I think Emerson's fantastic.
Mhm.
Do you have him as on your third base list?
I have him at number 7.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, and I kind of put all the draftees from last year in that grouping there, but I have him ahead of all the other draftees. Yeah, I like him. Great contact. He's with the young age. He's what at 89 average EV already, so that's right around somebody that is significantly older, like Marcelo Meyer, Jace Young. He's right
Mhm.
in that range. Chase DeLauder, all these, DeLauder, a college player. So Emerson already at 18 is hitting as hard as these guys
Mhm.
with great contact. One thing to note here, what I like about um, the three major sites, Baseball America, Prospectus, and Pipeline, is they do have the phone call away from front offices, and I
Mhm.
like to listen more than anything in those three sites as far as the polls go. What are other scouts, front offices saying about players on other teams? So what's interesting about Emerson when all of these sites sent their list to front offices, Emerson was identified as the riser, as
Mhm.
saying to everyone, you have this guy too low. I think he's
Yep.
52 at Baseball America right now. So, which is still damn good for, an 18-year-old to be 52 already on that list.
Right.
So, yeah, so scouts love what he has as far as this well-rounded player, extremely high floor player, and I think the comp to kind of like what people are hoping out of Royce Lewis is what
Mhm.
Cole Emerson has.
Right.
But in a dynasty league, he's a lot cheaper now, right? You could when people declare keepers, you could get him pretty cheap.
Right. He was 50 on the BP list as well. So you're
Mhm.
talking about a guy just turned 18 who's already 50 on a lot of lists. That's a pretty good place to start, right? Those are the
Yeah.
players that typically, if they follow their normal progression, are going to end up in the top 10 by the time it's time for them to hit the majors. Who do you have at three?
I have a question too.
Yeah,
So where this isn't for strategy sake because we're both in the dynasty league and we're both
sure.
drafting near each other, but where would you put him on FYPD this year?
I haven't looked. Um, I haven't looked at, to be honest, the FYPD ranks uh real hard yet. I'll pull one up right now. Uh, let's see. Fantrax has Yamamoto, Cruz, Skeens, Jenkins. Oh, here we go. They have Emerson at 10.
Mhm.
I think I probably would have him above. I'd have him above. Yeah, depends on need. Maybe Jenkins. I'd certainly have him above Shaw. I might have him above Waldrop, depending on if I needed pitching. I definitely would have him above Wilkin. Um, and depending on need, maybe above Clark. So probably somewhere starting around 5 on down, between 5 and 10 is where I'd
Mhm.
have him. I love him. I think he's slept on. And I do think, to your point, that idea that, when front offices immediately say across the board, you're too low on this dude, and we missed on this guy, it says a lot, right? Mariners got
Mhm.
lucky with Emerson for sure. Uh, who was your three? Did we already say your three?
My
Oh, you
3 is
lost.
Bush.
So
My
who's
4
four?
is going to be Brady House.
Mm-hmm.
For House, he was kind of the standout last year at the Futures game as far as batting practice. We missed it, but we were enjoying some good beer and nachos
Yeah.
beforehand. But he was the standout there. Even in his at bat, I think he had 105 past his shortstop into left field. Um, so he does have that quick bat. He has that power that you would expect from a third baseman. His swing and miss isn't as bad as people say. He makes decent contact. The one issue I have with him obviously is the walk rate. I think out of all the third basemen I have, he has the lowest walk rate at maybe 7%.
7%. Yeah, same
Yeah.
place. Same as me.
And that could be developed though. Again, he's one of these players that I think fall off lists because he was a high school draftee, right? He was 18 when he was drafted. He had back issues his first year. He's really coming into his power now that he's over that. Um, so um, yeah, I think he's overlooked. He's so overlooked. I'll call this out. That on the Tool Shed podcast where they were doing the third baseman,
Yeah.
they forgot him.
Yep.
Probably because he was listed at shortstop last year.
Mhm.
But so yeah, he's to me, I'm looking for ceiling guys. He's a ceiling guy with a power. I don't think his hit is bad. I don't think it's extra good. So yeah, I think he's worth that shot just because of that. And I do like young hitters. I think history tends to show, though we do have outliers like Bregman or Paredes, history does tend to show with prospects, if they could hit it to all fields, they have a lot better chance
Mhm.
of succeeding in the big. So
Mhm.
I like that as well, the all field power that will help his hit as well.
I have House at 7. Um, I think he's one of a couple of players. He and Caminero, I have as 65 power. Um, I have his hit at 55. I think he's got a better hit tool than people think. And he is a very good athlete. I'll tell you what, you tell me a 18-year-old, now 20, has back problems and plays sports, like I'm good. That's a hard one for me to get past. And so I downgrade him a bit for that. I also downgrade him because he's starting as a high schooler in the Nationals organization. And I don't trust the Nats necessarily right now to develop, right? I'm invested in James Wood, but I think James Wood has the kind of transcendent talent to be great despite the Nationals. I don't
Mhm.
know that I'm waiting to see them be able to develop more young players like a Brady House. He also was so, and I know he was injured, but he was so bad the year before that it's hard to, like I said, he's at 7 for me. But I'm not buying it quite yet. And the 7% walk rate, unless you're Junior Caminero, is a little scary as well. Um,
Mhm. That's funny you're talking about transcending the organization. I think Nats is one of those when you're ranking their top 10 players where you have that line of the players that are going to transcend, I think Wood, Cruz, but not somebody like, very raw like an Elijah Green
right,
or a House. You have questions about whether they could really develop them.
right. Or Hassel, right? Like Hassel has a nice hit tool. And I think you can develop him into something. I don't know what that something is, but he won't there. They spent all the money on Christian Vaquero 2 years ago, athletic switch hitting outfielder, and you don't know what he's going to end up, even pitching wise. Cade Cavalli, Harleen Susana, like it's where guys go to die unless they're just good on their own. Um, I've got Colson Montgomery at 4.
Mhm.
He is the currently shortstop prospect for the White Sox. 6'3", 205, left-handed swing, gets comped to Corey Seager all the time because he's white and blonde and 6'3" and plays shortstop and hits left-handed. Um, I don't love him as a prospect. I think he belongs here because he's got a pretty high floor with his bat at this point in time. I think he ends up too big for shortstop ultimately. Uh, I think he might be able to toggle between the two for a while, but I think he's a third baseman. Um, that's where he settles in, and that's what I try to do with dynasty lists is figure out where I think this player will settle in for the majority of their major league career. He made it to Double A this season, 19% walk rate, 19% K rate. I think I have that right here. Yeah, 56 walks, 56 Ks. He's
Mhm.
only stolen 3 bags in 3 years. And
Yeah.
so you have to weigh this idea that you'll have a player who doesn't get you any steals at all. Um,
Mhm.
he hit 8 home runs last season in 64 games. There's just a lot of this is projection. A lot of this is hit tool. I think I have his. Is he a? Let me see what I have his tools as. I'm as a 55 across the board. So no, excuse me. I have Emerson as a 55 across the board. I have nope, excuse me. You're right, Montgomery. Um, do I think he's a short or a third baseman worth investing in fantasy? Not for me. Um, he would be towards the bottom of my top 16 third base list. I think if he reaches his peak, that's not a guy worth investing in my mind. But because he has a very high floor, and because I think he's from a proximity standpoint, he'll be in the majors pretty soon. I have him at 4. I have
Mhm.
some higher ceiling guys below him. Do you have Montgomery on this list or as a shortstop?
I didn't include him in the list. I still have
Right.
him at shortstop,
Got it.
which he probably won't make. He did have an interesting fall, and I think this like a not fall ball, but just fall in general after his hot start last year. And I have questions as far as Chicago as well. Chicago
Sure.
is like the Nats. Will they be able to develop him? And his fall kind of makes me suspicious about what Chicago is doing, right? So he was rookie ball, he started out really hot, 353, and then moved to high A 345 batting average, OPS well over 1,000. But then once he got to double A, he dropped to 244 BA. His on-base percentage was still high. He's got a decent eye. 428 slug, which isn't huge. So his OPS decreased to 828. But then once he went to fall ball, and this was people that were looking at him live too, he kind of was a major disappointment at Arizona Fall League, not only with stats, but just the way he looked. So he walked 6 times, struck out 27 times in 90 at bat. So this eye they were talking about really didn't show up in Arizona Fall League. His on base percentage dropped to 300, and his slug was only at 415. And that's a hitter's environment
Right.
too. So you wonder, was he hurt? What was going on there? So, I don't think that says as much about his talent as it does, how is Chicago developing him, and is that being reflected there in Arizona Fall League?
Right. I think there is more projection. He his path in some ways is one that I gravitate to. He was a two-sport star in high school, big basketball star in Indiana. And I think some of those players take longer to develop, right? They take longer once they play exclusively baseball. And I'm not defending him. I don't love him as a prospect, but I do think that a lot of his ranking and a lot of what I see from him is projection. And I think if he's able to, at minimum, if he's able to identify pitches out of the hand and walk at the rate that he did during the regular minor league season, that portends well for his future as far as pitch selection, pitch identification. Now, what he does with those pitches, if he can hit those pitches, that's something a little different. But for now, I think there is something there, and this ranking for me is it part of it is just what scouts say, right? And because what I see is not great, but I'm keeping him there for now.
Mhm.
Who do you have at 5?
Yeah, it is interesting, the Seager comp that just comes up way too much. And yeah, these comp things, I fall into it too. I'm part of culture. I have issues in how I stereotype people. I hope to become more and more aware of that. But it's just, white guy, you got to find a big white guy. That's why your Peter Griffith Isaac one works, because at least you're not going by race there. You're going by body shape, right?
Really? That's what
So,
makes
but
part of
anyway,
what makes it funny.
yeah. So, yeah. Okay,
Who's your
number
5?
number 5, I have Keith, third base at in Detroit. We have the second base, third base debate over him, but I am placing him there. You don't know
Mhm.
what Detroit's going to do. He's not a great defender. Where is he going to end up is part of the question. But he's got a great bat. He's proven that throughout his career in minors, across the board. He's strong hit, strong power. Um, um, maybe 55 hit, 55, 60 power, not speed guy, 40 speed. I do like he has a decent eye as well, so he will have those walks, and then that increases his hit tool too. The only question I have about Detroit prospects is Detroit itself. They seem to have built that park around maybe what the last administration did in getting all those pitchers. Well, they move it in now that they have a new administration in, and they have some really good hitters coming up. They moved it in 10 feet last year. Still hurt, power hitters like Torque, who were just, the ball was going out there and still dying.
Right.
Yeah, so yeah, that's going to affect Keith. The park factor, I think, sometimes is underrated when it comes to considering these prospects. Like Marte is the complete opposite, right?
Sure.
So Keith's EV are not elite. He's like maybe stands at 89 average, 104-ish, 90 percentile. Max is not huge either. So he's, to me, he's the prototypical 55 overall prospect at third that can be very solid for you. I think he could be 10-ish in a top 10.
Sure.
But the park thing just doesn't get me beyond that.
Right. I'm at 9. It's probably a little low compared to consensus. I don't love him as a prospect either. I think I have 55 hit, 60 power, 45 run, 45 field. It's a lot of it is just the Tigers, right? Tigers, until you see them develop an offensive superstar out of the talent that they have, it's not a talent issue. It's a development issue and potentially a park issue, because Torkelson, Riley Green, and Colt Keith are very good prospects, right? Very, very good prospects. And with a ton of talent. I don't love the idea of immediately having a player at third that's not going to steal any bases in fantasy. I think you start in a hole. He's a big dude, 6'3". If you look at him, any of his highlights, it's just a big human, right? And so if you're not getting any steals and he's a power player playing in Detroit, and he's coming out of that organization, I have a hard time getting behind him. Now, there's talent there, and if he becomes a perennial 25 home run hitter, that's great. To me, some of the exterior factors plus the lack of speed don't get me there with him.
Who do
There's
you
also
have at 5?
what's that?
Who do you have at 5?
I have Tyler Black at 5.
Yeah, that's who I have at 6.
Okay, so Tyler Black.
We both don't mention him because maybe we both want to draft him.
I think we both want to draft him. I think it's exactly what it is. So Tyler Black is interesting, man. He's 5'10", 204. He's 23 years old. He played in, I think, double and AAA last season. He is the one third baseman on this list outside of Marte for me that has big speed potential. So as you like to say, if you're looking for the outlier at a position, if you're looking to get a leg up in a stat at a position, Tyler Black's your man. Like I said, 23 years old, double in AAA last year, 450 at bats, 18 homers, 15.8% walk rate, 17.9% K rate, and 55 stolen bases. Imagine roto or head to head. What does 55 steals at third do for your team, right? It's the advantage that whoever owned or whoever rostered Jose Ramirez has every single year at third base for years. I have him as a 55 hit, 55 power, 60 run. I think, if you're talking about proximity, Tyler Black is higher on this list than Colson Montgomery. I really like him a lot. He is left-handed. I know we've talked quite a bit about the idea that, young left-handed hitters can be a little scary because there can be some platoon splits or some platoon issues. But Tyler Black is a sleeper. He's one worth keeping on your radar. He's a risk that I am willing to take, and I'm sure he's a risk that you are also willing to take. The third base situation in Milwaukee, according to Roster Resource, currently has Andrew Montesterio hitting 8th and starting at 3rd. They have Bryce Terang They have Owen Miller. They have Jahmai Jones. Like you're not looking at a lot of like stellar talent. Oliver Dunn potentially. I do like him a little bit. Brock Wilkins on the way eventually, but Tyler Black is going to have an opportunity in Milwaukee this season. Um, I'm excited to see what he does, and I would fully expect one of the two of us to actually roster him at the end of our draft.
Mhm.
Do you have anything to add with Tyler Black?
Um, I think you covered it all, especially with the speed element. It is interesting that Milwaukee is kind of it leans a little bit towards pitchers sometimes, but it kind of has the sneak out for the home run, right?
Mhm.
So he doesn't have high EVs, but he's a type of to me, I think the comp here is Bregman, right? A faster Bregman, but obviously Bregman light, right? But I think he has the pull side power to sneak in some home runs in Milwaukee.
Yep.
And Milwaukee tends to favor, because his park factors are lower with the singles, doubles, and so forth. It tends to favor those type of hitters that are very skilled, that could kind of plug the ball in with double, singles, or triples in his case, but then help him with a home run factor at that place. So at
Mhm.
that park. So yeah, I like him a lot. He's a great sneak in there for kind of the sleeper of the list. The other thing I wanted to mention too, and you mentioned this, where is he going to play? Um, they've been talking about moving him around a lot, right? So he could earn first base eligibility. He already has second and third. So that type of runner, this is where maybe he differs from a Paredes. He has the run, so you could put him in those multiple positions and have a step up on your competition, not just at third base.
Right. I for whatever reason, I don't love. I know there are a lot of people who really love to have versatile players on their team. We've had multiple conversations about that. Certainly on Baseball and Coffee roster construction. To me it scares me at times because I start to think, well, if they don't have a regular position, are they going to get regular at bats, right?
Mhm.
And but I think Black at 23 years old with the current roster that they have, I do see them giving him this year as an opportunity to audition for a regular spot. Um, and like I said, you can't ignore the 55 stolen bases from a third baseman. I think that's a huge addition to your team if you can have a player like that can contribute without hurting you in OPS. Uh you gave your you said Black was what number for you?
Black is 6, 5 was Keith.
Got it. Who's seven for you?
Who's your 5 and 6?
So Black is five. Marco Luciano is six.
Oh, okay.
Um, I know some people still think Luciano's a shortstop. I don't. I think he's going to end up being. We'll not spend too much time on him. We'll talk about him at short. I assume too. Do you have Luciano as a shortstop?
Yes, I do, just
All
because
right.
he played with him last year. But I agree with you. I'm not going to argue that point.
I think he's a third baseman. I think Luciano has 35 home run potential in his bat. I think he's a 65 raw type of player. I think Caminero is what people thought Luciano was going to be, to be honest with you. Um, he's a little mechanical with his swing and he's had back problems. And
Mm.
so he's here on this list. I guess 6 and 7 is my bad back tier with Luciano in house. But I don't know that he's going to ever really reach that potential, but he had 15 home runs in 269 at bats last season in double and triple A. He came up to the majors for a quick cup of coffee. In the minors, he struck out 35% of the time, but he still has major lightning in his bat and the ability to be a 260, 270 hitter with 30 to 35 home runs. If that happens, I don't think anyone would be surprised because of his talent, but between his back and his ability to stay healthy and kind of the stagnant development, I don't know that that'll ever be the case with him. I still prefer him over those below him on this list for me because I think there is so much talent in his bat.
Mhm.
Ah,
I agree. I've rostered him in tons of leagues. I think he's a decent buy low now, just for you're
yep,
not risking much at this point.
yep.
He is, if we look at the top 10 of EVs, he's number one, two, three, four. He's number seven, 92
Mhm.
average EV, right? He's showing what people were attracted to initially. Scouts were, um, how well he hits the ball to all fields and the power there. So, yeah, I like him a lot, and I agree with you that he eventually will be third base. The only thing that, besides his back, that scares me is the park, right? The park factor.
Right. And
Giants.
a tremendous amount of swing and miss. I think we
Yeah.
can't ignore the swing and miss in his game. But again, you see him swing and you think Marte and Caminero, right? It's that kind of powerful swing that impacts the ball in a very different way than some of the others on this list. I had House at 7. What was your 7?
My seven was Emerson.
Okay, who do you have at 8?
I actually have 8 and 9 three players because
Okay,
I want to get my 10 in because I think you like my number 10 here.
right.
Um, so I have Miller, Wilkin, and Taylor kind of in that. These are the third basemen that were drafted in round
Sure.
one last year. I put Miller at 8 just because of the Philadelphia thing.
Mhm.
He has the best park, the best situation to move through. Obviously Bohm is not not going to be the giraffe at third base the
Right.
whole time. He'll ultimately move to first base or DH. So he's still I don't like ripping on players too much. He still plays a better third base than I would ever say with Bohm, but at the same time, he's not going to play there in the MLB. Yeah, so I have he was the one that showed up on Pipeline. Pipeline came out the same day we're doing ours of
Mhm.
the three. But you'll see these three interchange when it comes to the list themselves. But I just love his power and how that's going to play in Philadelphia. I have him at 60 power right now. The hit is a question. He's an overall 55 type of first year prospect. Yeah, so that's who
If I
I have.
can, if I can chime in with Miller, I have him at 10.
Mhm,
I do not have Taylor or Wilkin on my list. I understand why they're included. They would be just off. I like Miller the most of the
mhm,
three because I think Taylor is a high floor Tampa Bay Rays type of dude, right?
mhm,
Left-handed swing, college player, like outcome is gonna be positive, but not necessarily a superstar, but a contributor. Wilkin is kind of a dice roll, lesser hit tool, probably 45 hit, 60 power, but Miller strikes me as the prototypical high school a prototypical third baseman, right-handed hitting, 6'2", 205, big power right now. You want him to become a better hitter, but I can visualize that player better than I can to become a player worth rostering in fantasy quicker than I can the others, right? And I like his risk is still high for me because he's a high schooler, but I agreed. I have a 50 hit and a 60 power on Aiden Miller. And it's just from a profile standpoint, but it reminds me at times of like a Kobe Mayo, right? Like a hit or a power over hit,
mhm,
right-handed hitting third baseman who, you think Mike Schmidt, you think like there's this very typical like stereotype of what a third baseman used to be. And that's kind of where I put him. I have him at 10. Uh, so you have one more, I assume it's Ty Pete that you have at 10.
No, I have Cam Collier at 10.
Oh, you do? Nice. I don't
Yeah.
have Cam Collier on my list, believe it or not.
To
And
me, it's one of these very quick off the list guys that I don't think deserve it, especially how high he was last year. He was high on my list. A lefty batter was seen as a high hit, high power as power develops type of player. I do like that he is in the Reds. The Reds have improved their system, and obviously once these hitters get to the park, they could do well. He still is adjusting. He had a better second half than first half. He got hot at the end. His stats weren't sexy, but at 19, what are you going to do, right? So he was 17 when he entered rookie ball. He was 18 all of last year, and he just turned 19 in November, right? So why are we forgetting this guy? He had 57 walks, in 461 potential at bats already. I think he'll kind of be that Termarr 100 walks before you hit 20 type of guy this year. I'd be willing to do a Vegas bet on that. His power hasn't developed. His slug was at 356, only 6 home runs last year. But again, only 19. Give him some time to develop this. So yeah, I think he's in a dynasty, maybe not a hybrid keeper, but in a dynasty, he's a great buy low investment to roster and just wait and let him develop. Even in a hybrid keeper league, he's somebody you could grab, I think, in the draft. If he gets hot this year in the minors, his value is going to erupt. So yeah, I haven't given up on Cam.
There is an L. I try to be as truthful as possible on these lists, but I have to admit there is a little bit of strategy at times, right? And someone like Cam Collier, I was super high on coming into last year. In part, it was because of his development for his age. He tore rookie ball up. It was only 27 at bats, but he lit it up. But as you said, the dude just turned 19 and he was drafted in 22, right? So this is 2 years now of minor league ball that he has under his belt, and he's going to be 19 all year long. His dad was a major leaguer. He does have a really pretty swing. He has a park that's home park in the majors that's favorable for him. He's in a organization that's been pretty good at developing hitters in the most recent past, and he's just figuring it out, right? And to your point, the strategy part is I didn't really want to mention him. I was hoping people would forget. I don't know that I'll draft him in our draft, but he's somebody who's certainly on my radar and always will be. He's also a big dude now, like thick thighs, like big. You can see him as a slugger ultimately, and he hits the ball really hard. He just hits it on the ground right now. So I love Collier. I'm glad you included him. I probably jumped off the bandwagon too quickly with him. I think that until he shows some of that stuff, you put them in the same bucket as Termarr because they're not what you expected from them in 23. But the difference is his OPS was 705 and Termarr's was, 850 or whatever it was. And people are trashing both of them as if they don't belong. Termarr had the production, it wasn't in the shape that people thought.
And it's really interesting that with House's slow start, he didn't fall off lists like those two.
Nope, not at all. We could go there if you really wanted to, but yeah, I think there's something. I do think there's something to that. And House had a back injury, which could end your career. These guys didn't. It's the phrase everyone uses: development's not linear, right? And I think Cam Collier is a great example of that. I do have Ty Pete on my list at 8. Mariners third of 3 first-round picks last year. I love Ty Pete. Drafted out of Georgia, left-handed swinging player, drafted as a shortstop, will likely end up at third base, even potentially center field. Great athlete, 6'3", throws mid-90s, hurt his elbow in high school, which is why he's not pitching, but tremendous arm. Right now, he's not a great hitter. I think I've seen his hit tool around scouts as a 45. I have it as a 50. I think he's a better hitter than people give him credit for. But he has that potential 60 power tool, right? And he's fast. And so power, speed, can you imagine a 250, 260, 25 homer, 25 steal guy out of Ty Pete. He has that kind of ceiling. Lots of swing and miss right now, but again, it's something that I think the pitch recognition and some of those things he needs to work through, but extremely talented, athletic player who is worth the gamble, right? If
Mm.
you're talking about upside, you're looking for elite, as we talk about all the time. Ty Pete is one to jump on now, and if he shows a 55 hit tool and the power remains, then you're talking about a top two, top three player on this list next year.
Hmm. Now, is he the player that they got because of Julio the year before? Is he that slotted first round that they
Yes, I
earned?
believe Pete was the last one. So I think it was Emerson, Farmelo, and then Pete, or was it Farmelo? Was Farmelo the one who was the Rodriguez pick? I can bring it up quick. Farmelo was the Rodriguez pick at 29.
Hmm.
Um, Pete was picked at 30 um, as a competitive balance pick. So he went 30. Farmelo went 29 as the Julio pick, and Emerson went 22, I believe. Yeah, as the Mariners' true pick. But I don't know. There's a lot of guys. It's kind of with Pete and Aiden Miller and Cam Collier, kind of those guys down in this area. It's pick the guy you like the most, right? Pick the profile you like the most, the guy you want to follow, and invest in that guy. But fun. There's some really fun players. I question my Colson Montgomery at 4 based on how I talked about him, but I think he belongs there for now, at least from a pedigree and scout standpoint. Any other thoughts with third base for you,
Um,
guys you want to talk about?
not really. I think I'll be interested to listen to the baseball and coffee pod on that, just because it is starting to get deep again
Mhm.
there. I think the 1 through 5 is pretty obvious, but after that, what do you do? Do you move? You've already given a preview. Do you move some of these young guys up? And yeah, so it's a great position right now.
It is. So just to preview a little, what was interesting for me was you had this glut of 30 home run guys like Muncy, Gorman I put there because he's has third base eligibility. Jake Berger, Paredes, they're all kind of similar from a stat standpoint. Like, how do you rank those guys versus a Spencer Steer or Ha-Seong Kim who have third base eligibility, right? Do you want the 15 homer, 20 steal guy, or do you want the 35 homer but hits 220 guy? How do you see that? And then to your point, how do you rank a Caminero or a Marte or even a Gorman who's 23
Mhm.
amongst these other players, right? How high do you elevate them? So much of it, I think, is just how you see young players and how much time you spend investing in their understanding their development. Like ranking, I had a hell of a time ranking Caminero and Marte versus Ellie De La Cruz, Royce Lewis, Manny Machado, Nolan Arenado, right? It's where they are on their developmental curve is so different and their career cycle.
Mhm.
But yeah, super fun.
Some of these extremely high floor, dependable outputs like a Machado, and you could say he's ceiling, he was the lead as well. They're starting to fall off now, and so it's kind of fun transition period to see these young guys come in, and where do they fit in as these former elite players still
Mhm.
have a high floor, where they end up and as they move down the list.
Right. Jose Ramirez, when I looked at him, I was pretty surprised to see kind of how far he's fallen. And that's funny to say because he hit 24 homers and had 28 steals at third base, but he's not the Jose Ramirez that he once was, right?
Mm.
And to think about where does Devers and Riley are Riley's one for me. Riley's one, Devers is two, and those are the guys who are great now. But where do you slot Gunner in that? Is Gunner going to be with them? Is he just below? It's yeah, the position is deep and fun, and I really did struggle more so than any other position with uh third base so far going around the diamond. Um, Real quickly, favorite prospect, most underrated prospect, most overrated prospect for you?
Um, Favorite obviously is Junior Caminero. I, he was part of a Harper trade for me, and Harper is my favorite player, so
Mhm.
that underscores how much I like Caminero. Underrated, I would put number two. Marte is underrated. I think he could be a 25-20 third baseman that will be easily a top 50 player, top 40 player.
Mhm.
Um, Overrated. Um, can I say a non-prospect?
Sure.
No, no, I'll stick with it. I think there's some younger overrated prospects that aren't are underrated players that are currently there. But I would say, um, shoot, um, I would put in. I'll go after my own. I would say kind of. Well, no, I would pick Keith. So I like House better than Keith. Keith is getting a lot of press just because of his. I think he's one of those minor stats guys,
Sure.
right? He raked it last year. His minor league stats were great. I'm
Mhm.
just not sure that those are he could replicate those. To me, he's a poor man's Kyle Seager
Sure.
um, type of player. He's going to get you consistently 20-25 home runs every year. But is there anything beyond that? I don't think so.
I like that comp. I'm right there with you. My favorites are Marte and Emerson. Probably Marte if you really had me, to have to choose one. Most underrated, I would put Marte there as well. I just think he's being slept on. His ceiling is much higher than people realize. And most overrated is also Keith. I just think he's, like I said, between the park, the build, the lack of speed, the inability to develop in Detroit, I'm out on him. Um, Shortstop next week.
Yep. Look forward to that. That's
Shortstop is kind of always the most fun, right?
yes.
Should be good. And then we will be recording Baseball and Coffee's first base major league preview this weekend, I believe Sunday. So that should be out Sunday or Monday for everybody. Um, I love this, man. There
Yeah, it's
was a
fun.
part of me that where this is my most favorite part of the year before the season actually starts to be able to talk about all
Mhm.
these previews.
Yeah, and then to actually see these players in a month, start out spring training
It's
is
gonna be
fun.
awesome, man. I cannot wait. I cannot wait. Cool. Look forward
All
to seeing
right.
you in late March. First for the first weekend of regular season baseball. Till then, we will be back every Tuesday with our positional ranks, and then we'll come out with our initial top 100 after we finish the positional ranks up. Cool. Thank
All
you, brother.
right.
Appreciate
Take
it,
it
man.
easy.